Now, the Prime Minister went into these talks hosing down any expectations.
We enter this discussion with goodwill. There are no preconditions on this discussion. I'm looking forward to having constructive dialogue. I've said since I became the Prime Minister, but before then as well, that dialogue is always a good thing. We need to talk in order to develop mutual understanding.
Joining me now is Australia's top foreign affairs writer, Greg Sheridan of the Australian newspaper. Greg, it's fascinating, isn't it, that both America and Australia get these meetings. Both, incidentally, weren't announced until almost the last minute, apparently on the Chinese insistence, I don't know. How important is this meeting? But more importantly, how is it that it came about?
Well, Andrew, it's great to be with you, and good timing of them to have their meeting just for the start of your show, and a tribute to your influence, I think. But look, I always said all the way through our deep freeze, I said, actually, we're overestimating our own influence here. China puts countries in the doghouse. It does it for a certain period of time, and then it lets them out again. It gets tired of it because it decides that it's got other fish to fry, or it doesn't want to have too many enemies all at once. And it was always the case that China was just going to punish us for a certain period of time and then decided it'd finish the punishment. It's done the same with Japan, it's done the same with South Korea, done the same with numerous European countries. And it may not even be that it was anything to do with anything that we did, although obviously they took the opportunity of a new government in Canberra. But the other thing, always, the Australia-China relationship is a function of the US-China relationship. The Australian desk in the Chinese Foreign Ministry is not in the Asia section, it's in the Americas section. The Chinese, better than, the Greens or the Teals in Australia, they understand that Australia is an ally of the United States. And now the Chinese want various things from the United States. They want a few things from us at the moment. They'd like us to lift our opposition to China joining the Trans-Pacific Partnership. That's not going to happen. So I think the answer, why did they do it now, it lies much more in Beijing than it does in Canberra or even in Washington.
I can't agree with you more there. I'm just wondering, in part, I think it is, Australia's been punished. Now there's a new Prime Minister. Let's see if he's got the message and, behaves himself. I think there's an element of that. But I'm also wondering, Greg, to pick up on another point you made in passing, China seems to have been making a lot of enemies, right, with this aggression. A lot of countries are scrambling to form alliances. Even India's now, in this Quad meeting, and Japan and all that. Japan and Australia, closer military ties. Everyone guarding themselves against China at the time when the Chinese economy is going down the toilet. Maybe it's decided it's time to play nice because it can't right now afford all these enemies.
Yeah, I think that's right, Andrew. So two things I'd say about that. One is Beijing is certainly a rational capital. It's run by rational people. And it typically doesn't like to have too many enemies at once. So it beats up on someone and lets someone else off for a little while. And it's got a lot of enemies at the moment. So it's taking that into account. Secondly, the wolf warrior tone to its diplomacy over the last few years did nothing but damage to China's own national interest. Japan is now committed to taking defence expenditure up to 2% of GNP. South Korea, Australia, the United States are all increasing defence expenditure. There's much more, you've got AUKUS and the Quad and everything else. India involved in strategic balancing of China. The United States has said it's not going to export semiconductors to China. Now, all of this has been achieved, if you like, by Chinese aggressive diplomacy, and it got very little out of that aggressive diplomacy. So it's sensible for it to pull back and be more emollient. That's a good thing. The only note of caution I'd inject into all that is we mustn't be seduced by any honeyed words here. So I am, very happy that the Albanese government has talked not about resetting the relationship, but stabilising the relationship. not about taking the relationship back to where it was at some other time, but simply stabilising the relationship. That's very sensible. But even if the Chinese are playing nice, all the underlying strategic disagreements still exist. They've still got the biggest peacetime military build-up in global history. They've still got 2 of our citizens arrested. They've still illegally occupy islands in the South China Sea. They still engage in massive daily cyber attacks and attempt to steal our intellectual property and so on and so on. And it'd take the whole hour of your program to list all the things that they do. None of that's going to change. So it's good to get a calmer tone, but democratic leaders can easily be taken, for a ride. I mean, I love Tony Abbott, as you know. I think the world of him. But when Xi Jinping was in Australia, Tony Abbott said Xi had committed to making China a democracy. So it was reasonable for Abbott to take Xi at his word. But, Xi was having a lend of us when he said that. No. But I think the experience of the last few years means we're all going to be a bit sceptical of Chinese kind words now.
Well, just finally, Greg, I just wonder, in the background here, like just days before, just at the start of the Beijing Olympics, just days before, China signed a friendship beyond measure, without limits, a friendship pact without limits with Russia. Days later, Russia invades Ukraine. China probably thought, well, it'll all be done and dusted in a week, and our ally now has, just shown the West there's a paper tiger, and we'll be. But it's gone cactus. The Ukrainians now, months later, have pushed the Russian army out of the only provincial city that it captured in this war. That's Kherson in the south. And the Ukrainian president visited that liberated city just yesterday, even though it's close to the front line. Here he is.
Is it the beginning of the end of the war? It's a pity, but it's a long way, this war, to the best heroes of our country.
Where is that war going, and what's China learned from it?
Well, Andrew, China might have learnt that the West is still more formidable and resilient than it thought, but it also might have learnt that if it does something like this in Taiwan, it's going to make sure it's much more brutal and effective straight away, and it's not going to signal its intentions like Russia did, and it's going to be much more effective in cyber and in technological warfare. It's good that China said it's opposed any use of nuclear weapons. That's good. It's a pretty basic kind of thing to say, but it's good. I don't think China is really deserting Russia. I think it's very annoyed that Russia has performed so incompetently at the military level. I think it would have been perfectly happy if Russia had conquered Ukraine in, 4 weeks or something. Where is the war going? The Ukrainians do have tremendous momentum and are pushing the Russians around and pushing them out. However, I don't think the matter is finished yet, and I'm not quite sure what a desperate and cornered Vladimir Putin might yet do. He doesn't want to lose, his trade with India and Vietnam and China and so on. Therefore, he probably won't use a nuclear weapon. But I don't know what he'll do, and eventually. And the Ukrainians will negotiate a peace treaty, but they want all their territory back first, which is certainly fair enough. It's still very murky, and I think it's still got a long way to go, this war, but the Ukrainians are doing brilliantly at this stage.
Absolutely correct. And let's not forget, with China and Russia, they have actually been, if not enemies, very, very wary friends for many years. And China won't be too upset if Russia turns out quite weak. Thank you so much indeed for your time. Really appreciate it.